Hi guys, I'm Dr. Samantha Bolt over here at Live Your Life Integrated Health and Chiropractic. Today we're going to be talking about grain, sugar, and corn and what you should know before deciding to eat these, or at least eating them in the amount that a lot of people do. Today we're going to start talking off about white flour, so we're going to jump right into this. All right, white flour, what exactly is it? We can already see by the picture that on the left side we have the whole grain, on the right side we have the white grain or the white flour. There's already a big difference. So basically what they are doing is taking things out of a whole grain and then putting it back in as white grain. So it should have three parts. It has the middle part, the endosperm, which is mostly carbohydrates. Then we have the bran and the germ, which is where we have a lot of our healthy fats, healthy oils. We have the different nutrients that we need, vitamins, some minerals. So when they take those away and they just leave that middle endosperm part, there's not much left. Again, that's mostly carbohydrates. So why are they removing these parts? Well, they're removing them because it's lucrative. They can then sell these very healthy oils, healthy fats, healthy nutrients off to supplement companies to make their own money, to make their own nutrition products. If we just ate the whole grain in the first place, we would not have to be using as many supplements. All right, I love this chart. I think it does a good job at showing the differences between things that they call whole, refined, enriched. And a lot of times we hear these buzzwords, enriched, fortified, and they make it sound like they're adding all this fantastic stuff in. They're adding it in bigger quantities. It's going to be even healthier. But when we actually look at the numbers, are they really adding enough in? Is it really better for us? So let's take a look here. I'm going to see if I can draw on this as well. We're going to look up here at wheat, and we can see that we've got whole, refined, and enriched, those three different columns. Whole, the whole thing down is 100%, and what that is saying is that in the average whole grain, this is how much is in it. So when we go over to the refined, after it's done the refining process, we see these numbers drastically change. Food energy, carbohydrates, increase slightly, but then a lot of these other nutrients go way down. We are looking at fiber, which is at 22%. Some of the B vitamins, they're all going down to about the 20%. Vitamin E is down to 5%. And then our minerals down at the bottom here are all less than 50%, most of them even lower than that. So during the refining process, turning that in from a whole grain to a white grain, we lose a lot of nutrition. We lose a lot of fiber, and we even gain some extra carbohydrates. So when we go to the enriching process, which is when they're supposed to be adding all this stuff in plus more, what are they actually adding in? We see food energy and carbohydrates are the exact same. Fiber is still down there at 22%. The big changes we're looking at are typically the B vitamins and the iron. So we'll see B1 has gone up to 176%, B2 230%, iron has gone up 120%. So yes, they have added those back in. Yes, they are larger amounts, but all of this other nutrition is still missing. Vitamin E is still down there at 5%. All of these minerals are less than 50%. So even when we're eating enriched or fortified stuff, yes, we're getting our B vitamins in, we're getting iron okay, but we're missing so much else. Fiber is a huge deal as well. It may not necessarily be a nutrient, but it is extremely important for our digestive tract, our gut to maintain healthy bowel movements. So absolutely switching from white fiber I should say white grain over to whole grain, hopefully we'll notice an increase in better bowel movements as well. So we have rice over here too, and they did the same thing, whole rice, refined rice, enriched rice, and we'll see fairly similar numbers, right? The fiber is going down, all these nutrients are going down when it goes through the refining process. When they enrich, we see the B vitamins jump up there, we see iron jump up there, and a lot of these other nutrients are still lower or really low. We don't see quite the same drastic change with rice as we tend to do with wheat, but it's still a lot less. So we do want to be very careful when we're trying to pick out things based on them being enriched, being fortified. Those can be very misleading. We do want to go for the whole grains. So what we're going to do when looking for whole grains is we're going to look for pure sprouted grain bread that is not milled. So that's a lot right there. But if you can't find one that's stating that it is pure sprouted, that it's not milled, what you can do is look on the ingredient list for whole grain. And some of the other things that we're looking for is that it should be greater than 3 grams of fiber, greater than 4 grams of protein, less than 1 gram of sugar, or less than 110 calories per slice. So let's look here. All right, so let's first start out looking at this Ezekiel bread, which is definitely one of the best whole grain breads on the market. And we'll see right up front, it's going to say sprouted grain bread. When we look down here at calories, let me get my highlighter. We're going to see it says 80, so that's less than 110 calories per slice. We're going to come over here, and the dietary fiber is 4 grams, so that's greater than the 3 grams we're looking for. Sugars, 0 grams, great, less than 1 gram. Protein is at 5 grams. That's bigger than the 4 grams of protein we want in our whole grain slice. And then when we come down to these ingredients, we are pretty much seeing different examples of whole grains and very little else, right? There's not a lot of preservatives, there's not a lot of words we don't recognize. And it's not that some of those words that we don't recognize are perfectly fine, the body recognizes it, but there's a lot that are preservatives or meant for freshness or meant for added taste that our body doesn't recognize as natural and isn't very good at getting rid of them from our body. So we want to be very careful with some of those ingredients that we put into us. Now, let's look at the exact opposite. Even though I know a lot of people ate this growing up, a lot of people ate this as children, Wonder Bread is probably one of the worst breads on the market. So let's see here. Calorie-wise, it is at 90, so that's still less than 110 calories per slice. But when we come down here into our dietary fiber, we want at least 3 grams, and we're at 0. Sugars should be less than 1 gram, or 1 gram or less, and that's at 2. And protein should be greater than 4 grams of protein per bread, and we're down at 2 grams here. Not only that, when we come over here, we're seeing a lot of words that we may not necessarily want in our body. High fructose corn syrup, we're actually going to talk about later in this talk too, how we are going to want to avoid high fructose corn syrup. And so either way, this bread compared to the other one, even just the nutrition label wise, is nowhere near as good as the Ezekiel bread. So last thing with these whole grains, there's going to be different labels talking about whole grain and gives you an idea of how much is in it. So there's the whole grain, and even if it has this whole grain label on it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's all whole grain. What it means is there's 8 grams or more per serving of whole grain in it. So it's typically, I think it has to be about 50%, maybe a little bit more in order to have this label on it. The one over here, the 100%, and we'll put that in blue. Sorry, my circles are not great circles, but the 100% over here, the 16 grams more per serving, this is 100% whole grain. All right, so this is typically the label we will want to be looking for more often. Now I also get the question, should we be eating grains in the first place? My typical answer, especially if we have patients in here for autoimmune disorders, if they are coming in here because of a digestive tract issue, a health problem, we very often take them off grains completely for at least the first 3 to 6 months before we start putting them in the diet. Basically, we have too many patients with gluten issues, gluten sensitivities, with a lot, and we're just eating this bad grain, not the way we used to have eaten it. It's processed, it's refined, there's extra stuff added into it, and then we're eating it in large amounts. So with all of this combined, grains have become very hard on the human digestive tract. And I often don't have patients eat them at all, like I said, for that first 3 to 6 months. So if you are working on a healthier diet, trying to fix a health issue, my recommendation will always be more towards taking out almost all grains, if not all grains, and going much more vegetable heavy in order to get your carbohydrates in. There's also the whole keto diet, which is a very low carbohydrate diet. I do like that diet, especially under certain circumstances and for certain patients. However, I don't recommend it for everybody, and I do always think people should talk to someone before going on a full-blown keto diet. But that one is typically less than 5% carbs throughout the day, and we as humans are able to do that. We do not need carbohydrates in our system. We can actually make from fat, from protein, all the carbohydrates we need. All right, so moving on from carbohydrates, we're going to now move into corn and sugar. So if you haven't read The Omnivore's Dilemma, it is a very interesting book basically on different diets. And one of the passages in this was talking about chicken nuggets. And I really liked this passage just to show how much corn we eat. So it says, to illustrate how pervasive corn's influence is, Pollan, the author, gives us the example of the chicken nugget, which he says piles corn upon corn. What chicken it contains consists of corn because the chickens are corn-fed, as does the modified cornstarch that glues the thing together, the corn flour and the batter that coats it, and the corn oil in which it gets fried. Much less obviously, the leavenings and lecithin, the mono, di, and triglycerides, the attractive golden coloring, and even the citric acid that keeps the nugget fresh can all be derived from corn. And that's why in the last slide over, I had just said, when we head into the center of the store, so we're no longer on the peripheral, we're not looking at the meats, we're not looking at the produce, what do we find? We find corn and sugar. Even though it might look like we're eating something else, when we really go through the labels and figure it out, so much stuff comes from corn, and then we add so much sugar to all of it. So over a quarter of the items in a supermarket do contain corn. And it turns out the corn has a very interesting carbon structure that can be traced in everything that consumes it. And what that means is that most carbons are carbon 12s. So that's basically the stable form of carbon, that's the most common form of carbon. Most plants, when they are consuming carbon, are picky, and they are going to just go for the carbon 12. However, corn is known as a C4 plant. Basically, when it breathes in, it's going to breathe in 4 carbons, not 3 carbons, as most plants do. So that means that when it breathes in, it needs more carbon than most plants do. So it's not going to be as picky. It's going to take in other carbon isotopes. Carbon-13 is an isotope of the normal carbon, and it can be tracked back into our bodies. And so from that, we can typically, and it's one of the very few C4 or carbon-13 plants that we eat. And so it's very easy to track how much corn has been in a diet. They've done this with basically older civilizations to figure out how much corn they were eating, and we can do that nowadays to figure out how much of our food comes from corn. And one of the researchers on the project that was doing this said, we North Americans look like corn chips with legs. So let's go over here. All right, so we can tell the percentage of carbon from corn in people's diets. So they looked at different countries, they studied a bunch of different people in these countries. European countries, about 5% of their diet comes from corn. Mexico, they have about 11% of their diet from corn. So they have over doubled what the European countries eat. So what do we think United States is going to be? So we are 69% from corn. We eat so much corn in the United States, so much processed food. Basically, if you are eating processed food, no matter what you think you're eating, you are eating corn. Why does this matter? Why is it bad if we're eating all corn? One of the biggest reasons is because of the omega balances. So I know a lot of you have heard a little bit, or at least recognize omega-3s, omega-6s, omega-9s. What we have really started looking at is the ratio between the anti-inflammatory and the inflammatory omegas. Omega-3 is a fairly anti-inflammatory omega. It's going to help shut down the inflammatory process in our bodies. Omega-6 is more of an inflammatory omega. It helps build up, increase, and move along that inflammatory process. So our bodies need a balance of omega-6s to omega-3s. Inflammation is definitely good in certain circumstances. We just don't want it to get out of control. And for most of human history, that ratio has been about 1 to 1. We have 1 omega-3 for every 1 omega-6. Between 1935 and 1939, that ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s was reported to be 8.4 to 1. So for every 8.4 omega-6s, the inflammatory ones, we had one omega-3, one anti-inflammatory molecule. By 1985, this had increased to 10.3 to 1, and today we're at an estimate of somewhere between 10 to 20 in individuals in the United States, with some being as high as 25 to 1. And that is huge. That's so inflammatory. So when we're asking ourselves, why are we having so much issues with inflammation, with health problems coming from inflammation? We can start looking and going, look at our diet, look at what we're eating. We know exactly why we're having all this inflammatory issues. So again, processed foods, we have to be very careful with them. So if I hadn't said already, corn is an omega-6 plant. So if we're just eating all of this corn, that means that we're going to be having a lot more omega-6s into our body rather than omega-3s. One of the things we can do is add more fish oil, krill oil, get those omega-3s into supplement-wise. But of course, we can always just start removing the corn and putting in more omega-3s naturally into our diet as well. So obviously we're going to have some ingredients that definitely contain corn to look out for when you're grocery shopping. And of course, mostly say corn, so it's very easy to decide. But we have this whole other list of things that typically are from corn as well. And what does this mean? This means that these things, carbons, are coming from corn. There is still some debate about if it's just the carbon. Does that actually mean, are we getting the omega-6? No, not necessarily. We just know how much of the products we eat are from corn. But we do know that patients with higher omega-6 ratios are definitely more inflammatory. They have more health issues. They have more autoimmune issues. We do want to decrease that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. We want to have more omega-3s in the body. All right, so that's corn. Moving on to sugar. What's the issue with having too much sugar? Again, fairly obviously, inflammation. Another big one that causes surprise inflammation. Most of the bad things we eat are going to be more inflammatory items. So yes, sugar is a big inflammatory item in our body. It causes problems with nutrient absorption. It will block the absorption of certain minerals, of certain vitamins, and it causes electrolyte imbalances. So our bodies have a fairly low threshold for sugar, 2 teaspoons 2 to 3 times a day. Gram-wise, 1 teaspoon is 4 grams, so that's 8 grams 2 to 3 times per day, totaling about 16 to 24 grams of sugar. So in a day, that's where a healthy amount of sugar is about that 16 to 24 grams. We do not need to eat sugar. That is not a necessary food item. We could have 0 grams of sugar a day and be just fine. So the 16 to 24 grams is usually enough that the body can get rid of without having many, if any, negative side effects. Now, the American Heart Association says that you should not have any more than 41 grams of sugar if you want to avoid cardiovascular problems. So, how much sugar are we eating? So, the average American daily, and I've seen this range a little bit, is anywhere from 75 grams of sugar a day to 125 grams of sugar a day. Different studies have shown different numbers, but we are well above that 16 to 24 grams of safe sugar intake daily. And here's another chart just showing kind of how that sugar consumption has increased. In the 1700s, we had about 4 pounds of sugar per year. Now, by the end of the 1900s, we're consuming about 100, or maybe that's even into the 2000s here, we're consuming over 150 pounds of sugar every year. That has been a huge increase. And again, our bodies do not evolve that quickly. So it is trying to figure out what to do with that sugar. And for the most part, it's causing inflammation and other health issues. Looking at where is this sugar coming from, I love pulling up the example of a typical normal healthy breakfast, I'm going to call it, in America. And this is a fairly small breakfast. Half a cup of milk for the cereal, 1 cup of cereal. So I guess it's a decent sized cereal. 8 ounces of orange juice is 22 grams of sugar, 1 piece of toast, 5 grams with 1 tablespoon of jelly, 14 grams of sugar, and we're getting our grand total of 61 grams of sugar from a bowl of cereal, a small glass of orange juice, and a piece of toast with jelly. So it can get into the diet very quickly if you're not paying attention. Again, most patients come in here having no idea where their sugar is coming from, and they tell me they eat no sugar. We go through their diet and they're averaging close to that 75, 100 grams of sugar a day once we actually break it down. Here's one of the labels from a cereal box. Serving size is 1 cup. And if we go down into the sugars, we're seeing 17 grams of sugar. All right, so we're already reaching our daily 16 to 24 grams just with this one cup of cereal, and we haven't even added the milk yet. All brand buds, not anywhere near as exciting of a cereal. This serving size is 1/3 of a cup, but the sugars are at least down to 8.1 grams. That's half as much as a lot of the other cereals. Now the serving size is less, the fiber is more, and so you will feel more full on cereals like this. Yogurt is a big one that I have to talk with a lot of patients about. Yogurt has done a very good job of convincing the people that they are a health food. And that's something for another talk here. But looking at the sugars, at least in this Yoplait, we're at 26 grams of sugar. That is a lot of sugar. And that is just one thing of yogurt. Now, there are definitely healthier, less sugary yogurts out there, but this is again where I start just telling people, pay attention, start looking at the labels, start noting how much sugar you are intaking daily. Here's organic toaster pastries, Nature's Path. They use some good healthy buzzwords in there. We've got nature, we've got organic, but if we actually come down to the label, we are again seeing these sugars at 20 grams for one pastry. We've reached our daily limit, one healthy, supposedly healthy pastry, and we are at our limit. And so we just want to, again, be very careful. Orange juice, oh gosh, my patients that are drinking juice, we immediately do away with that. Kids that are drinking juice is just a huge no. Juice doesn't have much fiber, if any, in it, if there's no pulp. So basically what that's doing is the body doesn't even have that extra step to start breaking some of these bonds down. It's just shooting straight up sugar into the system. So 8 ounces of orange juice, we are at 22 grams of sugar. Again, we've reached our daily limit with that 1 glass of orange juice, and it is getting into our system, our bloodstream, very quickly. Here's another one, Minute Maid. We are up to 25 grams of sugar. And these naked juices, again, some of these juices they make look really healthy. They make it sound like you're getting fruit, you're getting vegetables in. And while you are getting some nutrition in, again, the sugar in this 8 fluid ounces of these naked juices is up to 28 grams of sugar. It's all pretty much undoing any of the health benefits of what you're actually taking in. Because remember, sugar will cause inflammation. Sugar will block the absorption of minerals and nutrients. What's the point of eating healthy stuff if you're too inflamed to absorb any of it? And then we have Coke and we have Diet Coke. Coke sodas are pretty much all right around that 39, 41 grams of sugar, I believe. So of course we're going to take out sodas immediately. Diet Coke, diet sodas, no, they're not going to have the sugar in them. We just say no to artificial sweeteners. We say no to diet stuff. There is a lot of bad chemicals that they end up having to put in there that will block hormone receptors. They just play havoc on the body. And so we always take those and remove those from the diet. Here is a list of different names for sugar. So even when people are asking, what about agave? What about honey? What about all these different things? It is still sugar. It still counts towards your sugar. Are they slightly healthier than just regular table sugar? Yes, they typically have a little bit of fiber in them, have a little extra nutrients in them than just eating sugar, but it's not much. It still counts as sugar, so we want to be very careful with it. And then just anything ending in ose is going to be a sugar as well. So start label watching, start checking how much sugar you're intaking into the body. My rule is if there is more than 8 grams of sugar per meal, we don't want it. So anything that has more than 8 grams of sugar per serving, we are absolutely not buying. It is staying on the shelf. We are not bringing it into the home. All right, high fructose corn syrup. Man, they have those commercials that start saying high fructose corn syrup, it's just sugar. And that unfortunately is just not true. And we are going to show that here. What is high fructose corn syrup versus sugar? So the sugars in high fructose corn syrup are extracted in a process resulting in different ratios of glucose to fructose. So normal table sugar is going to be 50% glucose, 50% fructose. The most common form of high fructose corn syrup is going to be 55% fructose, so more fructose, and 45% glucose, which seems really close to the same ratio as normal table sugar. So what's the big fuss? Well, over here we can chemically see the difference between the two of them. We have our normal sugar on top and our high fructose corn syrup on the bottom. All right, and we're going to notice very quickly there's one huge difference is this bond binding the glucose and fructose together. And what that bond basically does is slow down the absorption of sugar into our bloodstream. So when we're using high fructose corn syrup, again, this is just a shot of sugar straight into the bloodstream. That bond may not seem like much, but it does a lot. It gives the body time to start processing that sugar out of our bloodstream, finding places to put it or to excrete it. That high fructose corn syrup spikes the blood sugar much higher than normal sugar would. The other issue is just with the fructose alone. So, we'll go back to this for a second. In nature, glucose and fructose are bound tightly together. In high fructose corn syrup, that bond is missing. So going a little bit more into that bond, since there's no chemical bond between them, the normal processes of digestion are not required and the glucose and fructose are rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. So the only place fructose can be metabolized is the liver. Now, glucose has other places that it's used, but all fructose goes to the liver. And it can be very overwhelming in the case of free fructose. And it immediately starts tending to create fats such as triglycerides and cholesterol. So high fructose corn syrup has been shown to aid the process of increased cholesterol, increased triglycerides, as well as heart disease. We're also seeing more fatty liver, not caused by alcohol, but by fructose. All right, so again, free fructose consumption has been continuously linked to higher rates of obesity, increased belly fat, higher levels of triglycerides, cardiovascular disease, and overwhelmingly fatty liver disease. Fatty liver disease is becoming a huge problem because of the amount of high fructose corn syrup we have in the diet. These are some other studies showing the dangers basically of high fructose corn syrup. At the bottom down here, we do have, I'm always interested in mice studies. They don't directly relate to humans, but it's interesting. When one group of rats was fed sucrose and one group was fed high fructose corn syrup, the ones being fed high fructose corn syrup were found to have gained significantly more weight, even though the rest of the diet stayed completely the same. And we've had since then more studies with humans as well, showing the exact same thing. The other issue with high fructose corn syrup is they do contain higher levels of mercury, or typically they're going to contain higher levels of mercury, which is very toxic to humans, and it's another thing we want to be very careful about. Okay, so our big takeaways from what we've been talking about, and I did cut this slide a little short, and so that's why there's a few things we didn't get into too much today. One of the big things is eat more vegetables. Again, when it comes to grains, are grains healthy? Huge debate. For the most part, we want to be very minimal in the grains we intake, and we can get our carbs from vegetables or make them from the fats and proteins that we eat. If it contains, coming down to the third one, if it contains more than 8 grams of sugar per serving, don't even buy it. We know we're probably going to have some other sugar in that serving, in that meal, eating something else. We don't need it. If it's more than 8 grams, we're going to overload our system. Be very wary of other drinks other than water. We looked at juice, we looked at soda, We know those are really high in sugar, and we know that most people are dehydrated a lot of the time. So we do want to be getting more water into our system. If we are going to buy grains, look for the whole grain label. Much more nutritious, much more fibrous. It's going to be healthier for you to eat that, and you're going to feel fuller a lot faster than when you're eating white grains. All right, you guys, I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, liveyourlifechiro@gmail.com. We're located over in Erie, Colorado, and I hope this has been helpful. All right, you guys, take care.